Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, excelencia que trasciende.
Y después, en la hora de café, puedo hablar en español mejor. Bueno, my talk is about Venus Almanac, which is a very important subject in Mesoamerican iconography. It's one of the most important planets that we know of. Perhaps Jupiter might also be important, but Venus is the one that we know the most about from the ethnographic records and from the codices and even from the classic period as well. The best known stories of Venus are about the colonial period chronicles tell of Tlawis Calpanticutli, who is the Lord of Dawn, and it's basically a story about Quetzalcoatl, who disappeared on the eastern horizon, went from the west to the east and disappeared into the water and emerged as the Lord of Dawn. And Tlawis Calpanticutli means Lord of Dawn, so that is one reason we often connect Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, with Venus. The period that Quetzalcoatl spent in the underworld was 8 days in the legend, and that's exactly how long Venus spends in the underworld on average in what's called inferior conjunction, which you will see what that period means shortly. There are a variety of ways that Venus imagery appears, and that's what we're going to look at today. In the post-classic period, we have Venus almanacs that show the Venus god itself with an actual star belt, which is circled in the far left here. And often he has what's called the quincunx, 5-dotted face paint. He is seen in that format in a variety of the codices, including the Codex Borgia and the Codex Vaticanus V, both of which are Central Mexican codices. But he's also seen that way in post-classic Maya texts that have to do with the period of time when Mexico, Central Mexico, and the Maya area were in fairly close contact. For instance, the quincunx in the Madrid Codex that has a little arrow there is actually a Venus sign in the sky band. And some of the gods that we have from the censors in Mayapan, which are a wonderful corpus of modeled figures made out of clay painted with very interesting designs, show that both the quincunx and skeletal imagery are associated with the Venus god. When we see in Central Mexico the full array of the Venus Almanac, as in the Codex Borgia here, there's some very interesting patterns that emerge. For one thing, you can actually trace a 104-year period in this particular almanac, but you see that it is divided into 5 separate periods of 584 days, which is actually equal to 8 approximate solar years, because of course the solar year is 365.25 days, but the number that's used in these almanacs is 365, and then they are corrected. There's also an interesting association with the lunar cycle, but it's not exact, but it would be approximate because there'd be 99 lunar months in the Venus Almanac. So the total 104-year cycle is shown on, in the Codex Borgia, which is from Central Mexico, probably from Tlaxcala. One of the interesting things, I have a book coming out on the Codex Borgia from the University of Texas Press, and it is about astronomy, of course, because that's my area, or archaeoastronomy. And one of the interesting things that I found was that when you look at the faces of each of the 5 Venus gods, each is different, and they each seem to be wearing a mask. The first one is actually an actual face of Huitzilopochtli and with a skeletal jaw. And that combination I mentioned to you already, the 5 dots and the skeletal face. But the rest of them have faces that could be considered to be day signs. So while I didn't exactly solve what that means, I did raise the issue that there may be some subsets that people are intending to show here through not only symbolism like the lunar rabbit, who is known from the Borgia, but also perhaps with day signs slapped on their face to show specific days in the sequence that were considered to be important. Each of the Venus gods spears a victim, and this is also perhaps important in terms of astronomy because some of these victims are deities that are astronomical, and such as the deity Tezcatlipoca in the lower right. Well, throughout the history of the morning star god, Huitzilopochtli, he is looked at as a warrior. He's always spearing someone, most often with an atlatl, which is a spear thrower, which has a curved device that allows the spear or the arrow to be sent at a far distance. And we have a variety of ways that the Venus god is shown throughout history. And the more recent being the Codex Borgia, which dates about 1500 AD, where we see here the Venus warrior with a bird face. And he is one of 5 different aspects of the morning star. And Tezcatlipoca is his victim. I have other studies of Tezcatlipoca and his Maya counterpart that suggest he may be the planet Jupiter. We won't go into that today, but in the counterpart in the Dresden Codex, which is a Maya almanac showing the Venus periods that we will look at shortly, the counterpart for Tezcatlipoca is the god Kawil, who is considered to be the close counterpart. So we have at least a parallelism in these 2 manuscripts of the relationship of the Venus god spearing the victim, who may be the planet Jupiter in this case. In earlier time periods, such as at Chichen Itza, around 900 AD, we see the similar kind of Venus god with a star belt. I showed you the star belt earlier on with the Codex Vaticanus V, but the star belt is quite important in the imagery of the Maya area, particularly. And the star belt is around, as you can imagine, around his waist. On the far right, the upper right, you can see what is a star worn around his waist. And then on the lower left, you can see another image from Chichen Itza, a little bit earlier, around 800 AD, wherein the star belt is much larger and more impressive, but still we see the same aspect of Venus as a warrior carrying a sheaf of darts, essentially, that are tossed with his atlatl, which is in his, I guess, his right hand, looking at him. Anyway, the curved object that looks like a boomerang. And then we go back further in time to Teotihuacan, which is one of the foundation cultures of central Mexico, and we see a very similar kind of imagery with a star warrior wearing a belt that has a radiant pattern, and he is carrying a spear thrower, an atlatl, which is in his right hand, and darts in his left hand. The fusion of the Central Mexican and Maya iconography in the Venus calendar is very impressive. It is quite detailed in the Dresden Codex, which is the Maya Codex, because we actually have Venus gods who are named after Central Mexican deities. The upper one on the upper left, on Dresden Codex 46, is is a purely Maya god. He may have a counterpart in the area of central Mexico, but it's not as easily known which that counterpart is. He's the Maya god El from the codices. On the lower left, we have a god who actually looks very much like the central Mexican god known as Xutecutli. And in this particular passage of the Codex, his name is spelled out phonetically as Xutecutli. So in other words, it's a Maya manuscript dating to around 1250 AD, but they're using Central Mexican names for some of the Venus gods, which provides a hint that maybe some of the Venus Almanac might have come from Central Mexico. On Dresden Codex 48, the howler monkey that's shown on the upper right is phonetically named with a name that's an approximation of Tlahuizcaltecutli, the Lord of the Dawn that I first mentioned to you at the beginning of the presentation. This will be a little hard for some people to see, especially since apparently on this screen you can't count on anything, according to the future speakers, that you can't count on anything you put near the bottom. It doesn't show. But in any case, the way the Venus Almanac in the Dresden Codex is laid out using Maya numbers essentially divides up the Venus cycle of 584 days into 4 periods. And the last period is perhaps the easiest for you to see. On the bottom, you have the number 8, and above it a shell which represents 0. So that is the 8 days of inferior conjunction, which I mentioned to you early. Tlahuizcaltecutli, before he was transformed into the Lord of Dawn, when he was still Quetzalcoatl, spent 8 days in the underworld. And so this period is divided in 4 on each of the 5 pages, and it's interesting that each of the 5 pages represents a full 584-day cycle, but that the entire almanac is actually 104 years long, like the Codex Borgia that I showed you at the beginning. So each page representing 584 days, which are a cumulative total you see in red on the bottom, with the 8-day period being the last, the one with the shell and the number 8, actually adds up to 5 times 584, which equals 8 solar years. So this is the basics of the Venus Almanac. They were looking at short periods of time as well as long periods. They saw an equation between 8 solar years and 5 Venus cycles, because after 5 Venus cycles, Venus would be in the same position, of course. Each cycle it gets back to, shall we say, the first of the morning star after 8 days in the underworld. But after 8 years, you'd see it emerging as the morning star at the same time of year. So they made a short almanac to kind of emphasize the relationship of the solar cycle to the Venus cycle. The way this works out in detail is probably not going to be of that great interest to you, but there is the Solkeen that is a period of 260 days that is meshed with the 18 months of the solar year, and each month, of course, has its own name, and each day in the Solkeen has its own name. So combining the two makes a 52-year cycle, which perhaps some of you have found out by going to some of the workshops that were presented. But one of the most important days, or keys to this whole thing, is that they always wanted Venus to be rising. The ideal was that Venus would be rising on the day Wanahau, and so that all of the periods that you see that end the 584-day cycle, the ideal rising point would be Venus rising on the day Wanahau. But of course that didn't occur, but rarely. but they tried to measure the intervals between these 1.5 risings, and the last of the Venus pages, page 50, has that ideal setting, 1/2, 13 Mach. That's a date in the year cycle. And the spearing event that we've seen in the middle register there, with the Venus god holding his atlatl, he's spearing on a day 1/2, 13 Mach. And the way that is shown in the glyphs is displayed in the upper right. In the east, great star Venus spears his victim. And then the victim is named, and there's a lot of other information there that is useful to deciphering what is going on. The table, however, is linked in real time with calendar round dates. So the 1/2, 13 Mach date, although it's not a long count date, as we say, with the 3,000, with the cycle that is ending now, the Baktun cycle, the 13 Baktuns, that would be part of a long count cycle. These dates recur every 52 years. So the problem is, which 52-year cycle are we looking at? And so that's been the discussion of back and forth between astronomers and people who study glyphic records. And pretty much there are a variety of theories that have developed, and the Brickers are the most recently brought out a book that is available through the American Philosophical Society, and they believe what is called the current run of the table. In other words, when does the table work? When does that 1/2, 13 Mach work? And they believe that it would work on a date of correlating 1/2, 13 Mach to 16th of July, 1123. Lounsbury, although he didn't use the correlation that we're now using, his correlation was 2 days off. He was of the opinion that these are the Gregorian dates, by the way, not the Julian dates that are used by astronomers. I'm using the Gregorian dates because it helps you to see how it is in our calendar. So the way that Lounsbury saw it, and the way I see it also, is that the date should correspond to June 20th, 1227. And because Lounsbury was using a different correlation, he didn't realize that this was the day before the summer solstice. And in my work, I've emphasized that I think one of the reasons that they are interested in the Venus Almanac is because it helps to coordinate the solar cycle with the Venus cycle. They're interested in 2 cycles simultaneously. So my take on this is that we need to look more and more to what solar dates are of interest in the Venus cycle. And one of the calendar round dates that I selected, which is, all right, now I'm giving you the Julian dates to confuse you a little bit here, but that's what astronomers use in all their work. So June 13th, 1227 is equal to June 20th. Because after the Gregorian reform in 1582, 10 days were added to the calendar to get it to be in proper registration with real events. And so, but at the time that this calendar was done, it would have been only 7 days. It would have drifted only 7 days apart. And of course, at the time, much earlier, in the time of the Julian calendar, when that was developed, there was no drift at all. The winter solstice, fell on the winter solstice. It wasn't the day on December 21st. There wasn't any drift. But what was interesting to me was that not only was June 20th, the day before the summer solstice, but it was also an accurate day in 1227 for the heliacal rise of Venus. And at the beginning of that same 5 Venus cycle run, they also had an accurate heliacal rise date, which took place in 1221. So I was impressed that they had 2 in a row, and the other ones are only a few days off, as you'll notice by comparing the actual rise dates with the events shown on the Julian date and the actual rise date. Okay, well this is going to be hard to see from a distance, but this is the way it displays on the table itself. If you equate the tonal Poali or Tzolk'in dates to their equivalents and the month glyphs as well. So on 5 Khan 7 Shul in January 26th in the Gregorian calendar, in 1221 there was a true heliacal rise. That's the circle on the left. The circle on the far right is 1/2, 13 Mach, which is a true heliacal rise the day before the summer solstice on June 20th, 1227. And the interesting thing about this particular run of the table, which is considered to be the current run, is that it's also the end of the 10th Baktun, which came to a close on June 15th. So they were, the Dresden Codex uses long count dates, the full 13 Baktun cycle, and actually larger cycles as well. But in this particular part of the Codex, they're not using long count dates, they're using calendar round dates, but they're referencing the importance of the 10th Baktun coming to a close in this particular current run of the table. And actually, there are long count dates in the calendar, and the latest one is 1210. So it's perfect with what we see as the current use of the table it's in that period. So that I believe that there was an increased interest in Venus during the end of the 10th Baktun, but I also think that at the end of the 9th Baktun, there was an increase in interest in Venus, the Venus cult, and that would have been the Baktun before, which was one that ended in 830 AD, which is 10-0-0-0-0, and not 13, such as we're coming to a close here in this 2012. This is 13, 3 Baktuns earlier, shall we say, and at that time we see Venus imagery appearing in the Maya area, in the lowland Maya area, rather suddenly. There's very little, particularly there's Central Mexican Venus gods that come in. For instance, on March 9th, 830, at the Baktun end, Venus was invisible in superior conjunction, so it wasn't seen. But we have a date that that might refer to Venus events during that period. And you see images of Venus as Ehecatl Quetzalcoatl at Ceibal here in Guatemala. And you have a number of terminal classic round wind temples that are dedicated to Ehecatl Quetzalcoatl, who's the wind god aspect of Venus, at Ceibal, at Chichen, at Uxmal, and in Belize. We have a number of images also from Chichen Itza appearing just around this time that emphasize Quetzalcoatl in imagery that seems to be related to Venus. The Venus cult at Chichen Itza seems to begin in the terminal classic period, perhaps around 830, with Venus symbols that are not the Central Mexican style, but the Maya style, just as those seen in the Dresden Codex, as you can see with the arrow. It's the same kind of Venus symbol that appears in the upper temple of the Jaguars lintels at Chichen. But you also see a more Mexican style Venus symbol as the star belt in these narrative murals that appear in the upper temple of the Jaguars. The lintel itself has a Venus warrior confronting a solar warrior who also has an atlatl and is in a sun disk. That's in the central register where you see a rayed disk. And there's a series of confrontation images that I believe may represent a specific phase of the Venus cycle when Venus is traveling with the Sun, either in the shorter inferior conjunction phase of 8 days or in the longer superior conjunction phase when it moves behind the Sun and is invisible for about 50 days. But the Maya sometimes gave it as much as 90 days for reasons of correlating the lunar cycle with the Venus cycle. The upper temple of the Jaguars has a complex series of murals that you no longer can see. You're not even allowed up in there anymore, but they mostly are totally gone. But Adela Breton, at the turn of the last century, made detailed paintings of the murals when they were still visible. And so we use those as guides to what was represented. The series of murals are divided into 8 parts, which I thought was interesting in light of the fact that there is an 8-year cycle for the Venus Almanac, and also because there's so much Venus imagery in this series of murals. And so we've seen the lintel a little more closely, which is numbered 1 here, where the Sun and Venus meet in the lintel as the first kind of part of the narrative. On the second, there's an attack on a fortified town, which you can't really see the wall very well, but I've underlined where the wall is. It's a curved wall. Number 3, on the north wall of the upper temple of the Jaguars, there's an attack on a town, which is located on a hill. On the 4th part, in the northeast part of the structure, there's warfare that in a series of clay hills that are almost universally identified as the Pook Hills. And number 5, Venus and the Sun meet again, perhaps another of the conjunction events, shall we say, represented graphically. And on the 6th of the images, there's a scene that seems to show a peaceful setting. There's no warfare shown. There's a lot of detail of warriors, but they're not involved in warfare. And then number 7, there's an attack on a community with scaffolds, and there's been some evidence of scaffolds in other kinds of scenes of warfare. So this would be a situation where they had to mount walls, perhaps with scaffolds. And then on number 8, there's an attack on a very dense village that's shown in the upper left. So it seems to me possible, although some people discredit the notion of Venus warfare, which became popular in the work of the works that were published by Linda Sheely and her colleagues. It seems possible that this does represent a series of attacks that were at least visualized in relation to the Venus cycle. And to show you some in detail, the warrior with the star belt that we saw earlier as a drawing has an atlatl in an image that seems to represent the morning star. And you see canoes and trees in this more peaceful scene of a forested place near water. And then another scene, I'm not going to go through each one of them, shows this is the last scene in the narrative where you see the dense village in the upper left. You see a sun disk warrior and feathered serpent warriors, and the attack is taking place under the auspices of these 2 deities. The upper temple of the Jaguars also is interesting for having very explicit imagery of the feathered serpent, who is the equivalent of Quetzalcoatl, also called Kukulkan in the Maya area, which literally means feathered serpent. And the entryway to the temple itself has 2 giant feathered serpent columns and rattles on the tail, and the serpents have feathers all over their body. So this is definitely a temple devoted to the feathered serpent, and while you might see the feathered serpent as representative of all sorts of things, there's no question that one of its primary identities is in relation to the Venus cult. Chichen Itza also has very specific references to Venus in a platform that's called the Platform of Venus. And what's interesting about this one is that it shows an equation of Central Mexican imagery with Maya imagery, because Chichen Itza was one of the places where we see the best link between the two cultures, and you see it increasing later on in things like Mayapan and in the Madrid Codex, and to some degree in the Dresden Codex also. So we see a bar, which is the Maya sign for 5, attached to a Central Mexican Venus symbol. And we see a Central Mexican year sign attached to a series of year bundles with the number 8. Well, actually 1 year bundle representing a year, but the number 8, but the numbers are written in Central Mexican style. So they're equating 5 Venus cycles with 8 solar years, but using symbols from 2 different cultures. The 8-year Venus Almanac may well have originated in Teotihuacan, in my opinion. You can see a lot of relationship between the Chichen Itza Mercado Venus glyphs, for instance. They're part of the imagery of the feathered serpent. That undulating serpent has feathers all over his body, as you'll notice, and his tail as well, but also he has rattles. Well, the rattlesnake is very important in Central Mexican imagery, and many images of the feathered serpent show him with rattle tail. In La Ventilla in Teotihuacan, we see one of the first appearances of these Central Mexican Venus symbols. And this may not be the earliest expression, so I put the question mark, because certainly something will be earlier than this. But in any case, we have that Central Mexican style Venus symbol appearing earlier than in the Maya area. So if we look at the relationship or the development of where the Venus cult appears first in relation to the 8-year Venus Almanac, this short period, not the long count calendar, this short period of 8 years equaling 5 Venus cycles, it does seem that it might have come from Central Mexico. And there's also some fairly early evidence at Tikal. At Tikal, we have some very Teotihuacan-style structures, such as, there are actually 2 of them, 5D43C, which, as you can see, shows the Venus glyph on the top and bottom registers, and then twin circles, which are believed to be Tlaloc eyes, but also may be related to the Venus imagery, because somehow or another, Tlaloc is very involved in this Venus Almanac. So around 600 AD, we have definite evidence of a Teotihuacan-style Venus cult at Tikal. And slightly later, around 740 AD, under the reign of Yishkin, I'm terrible with the Maya pronunciation, Yikin Chan Kaumyu, ruler B, we see groups of 5 eyes that are really big eyes, shall we say. And they're basically, that's one of the names for Venus in the Central Mexican and Maya area, is Big Eye. And so this is probably a set of Venus images that has evolved past the early Teotihuacan influence and now is developing more into the Maya version of Venus as a big eye. And when we go to Uxmal, we have around 800 or 900 AD, we've got another kind of Central Mexican influence seen in the feathered serpent imagery that appears between 800 and 900 AD, and also these war owls that appear on the nunnery, and they're basically, the owls have darts sticking out of their heads, and they could be well related to the Venus Almanac, and in fact some studious person, Weldon Lamb, counted every X on the facade of the Moncas and found that it records actual intervals of time related to the Venus Almanac in sets of 584. And the double-headed serpents themselves are in sets of 8, which kind of gives you the equation of 8. These are often called year serpents too. So 8 solar years equals 5 Venus cycles again. The Adivino pyramid on the west facade of Uxmal's Chenes temple actually has the numbers recorded, and it has Venus signs in the Maya style, a sky band in which you see the number 8, and the 8 solar years again is very important in the shortened Venus almanac, which equals 5 Venus cycles. You see the number 8 also on chalk masks at Uxmal's House of the Governor, and again the chalk masks often appear in sets of 5, interestingly enough. Now chalk is the equivalent god to Tlaloc in central Mexico, so somehow or another they're looking at either patterns of rainfall or somehow the rain god himself is linked with the Venus almanac of 8 years. At Uxmal, the sets of 5 Venus gods are seen in the House of the Governors, where each one has a Venus glyph, a Maya-style Venus glyph. And then there's a separate temple. It is called the Temple of Venus, not surprisingly, and it has 5 Venus glyphs in the Moncas, the Uxmal nunnery, also referring to the 5 Venus cycles in the shortened 8-year almanac. Interestingly enough, the Uxmal Moncas also has sets of 4 chalk masks, and the 5th mask, which would be the 5th in the set, is actually a Tlaloc mask. So there's an equivalency here that they're making in this central Mexican influence that is seen. And Tlaloc and the year sign headdress, we will look at shortly. Actually here, the year sign appears in his mouth in the nunnery stat mask stack. Tlaloc is very involved with the year sign headdress, which we've seen the year sign was used in Chichen Itza on the Venus platform. And all of these different images from different cultures and different time periods show the same equivalency of Tlaloc with the year sign, associated with the year sign headdress. And the 2 of them on the lower right, from Aguateca and Dos Pilas, are actually associated with dates that record Star Wars. Again, a disputed topic, but still one that shouldn't completely die until we understand what's going on. The fact that the year sign headdress is here, the fact that Venus glyphs are used in the text, and the fact that actually on the Dos Pilas one you can see there's a Tlaloc mask on the apron of the figure who's the warrior. In the Codex Borgia, where we understand a bit better about the almanac capacity in terms of Venus imagery, it's been our recent development that we've recognized actual dates in the Codex Borgia that are real-time dates that relate to actual events. And for instance, the almanac on page 27 opens with a date, 1 reed, 1 crocodile, which is an equivalent to the last of the evening star in 1467. This is work that was done by Tony Avini and Vicky Bricker. But in my work, in my book, I've pointed out that the second occurrence of the 1 reed, 1 crocodile date, because of course the 260-day calendar repeats to some degree in the year, because there's only 260 days and there are 365 in the year. So the second occurrence seems to be even more interesting in that it falls on the winter solstice in 1467 and is the last of the morning star. So here both dates could be very important, and there's a 260-day period between the last of the evening star and the last of the morning star, which won't always occur. It won't always be 260 days, but it's interesting that the second occurrence also occurs on the winter solstice. So the Venus almanacs, if you take one thing away from this talk, would be that they are focusing on locating Venus events in relation to the solar cycle, and they would like the solar cycle to fall on a specific day of interest, in terms of the Venus calendar, or vice versa. But they also want special days, like one Ahau. One crocodile is a very special day, the one on the lower right, because that's the beginning of their 260-day count. So they've chosen an important date there, too. So when we move on to later time periods, and Mayapan, and the Hall of the Sun Discs, not Borgia is late enough, that's around 1500, but Mayapan, later Maya material, we see the Hall of the Sun Discs at Mayapan, which is about 1450 AD. We see 8 sun discs, 1 sun disc for each year in the Venus Almanac, and each one has a different companion. And I believe that each of the companions could be a different aspect of Venus. I think it's Jesus Galindo who pointed out that or maybe it wasn't you, I can't remember now, but you were certainly involved in this, about one side is lit up on the summer solstice and the other side is lit up on the winter solstice, which I think is also important, that there's a illumination of 2 different sides of the narrative that is 8 years. At Mayapan, there's also a Temple of the Fishermen that is very important and very unusual imagery. It seems to show Quetzalcoatl in the central Mexican garb of his headdress, his necklace with an oliva shell necklace, but here just one giant shell. And also the Chichan serpent, who is a serpent whose name actually refers to one of the days in the calendar, the day sign Chichan, which means snake. And so this imagery does relate in some way or another to Venus, and we actually have in the Madrid Codex the quincunx Venus glyph that I showed you at the beginning. We've got Chak with the year sign headdress. And the Chichan serpent, I believe in this representation, I've published on this for the past 30 years, this particular set of pages, and each year I get a little, I think, closer to what I think is the right interpretation. And so I'm still maintaining that this is a seasonal almanac, and I'm still maintaining that Pleiades is important in it, but the main figure of the Chichan serpent, Carl Taube said that he thought it was Quetzalcoatl, and I think he's right. And so we have an imagery of the feathered serpent over a display that runs over 6 pages with an introduction page. So just to explain how this would work, the Venus period is shown with a single 260-day Solkin. It's a natural length because Venus is visible for about 260 days as both the morning and evening stars. And between 1452 and 1500, the probable date of the Madrid Codex, Venus was visible as evening star from February through October, which is about 260 days, which is the period represented on Madrid 13 through 18. Then the Brickers pointed out to me I can't ignore the eclipse glyphs, so I started to work with the eclipse glyphs, and I found that in 1452, 1460, 1468, 1476, 1484, 1492, and 1500, at 8-year intervals, there was a repeat of Venus as the evening star from February through October, coinciding with the agricultural cycle. And the first of the evening star occurred in 1452 on February 16th, on 1460, February 14th, 1476 on February 6th, 1484 February 6th, 1492 February 4th, and the last of the sequences you can't see, 1500, was February 1st. How does this relate to eclipses? Well, it turns out that eclipses took place at 8-year intervals throughout the period, and in 1452, the first of the series, and 1484 and 1492, eclipses were visible in Yucatan, and the first in the series was a total eclipse in 1452. And as you can see, the pattern on the lower left shows the centrality of the eclipse went right over Yucatan, and would have been very impressive. And the date of that 1452 is 13 Chichan. And the date 13 Chichan is represented on the page. You have the red number 13, and then you've got the Chichan serpent itself representing the day sign. So the day is represented, graphically on the pages, as are the eclipse glyphs. So the Madrid Almanac represents a series of images of Venus as the evening star over a period of time that there were a series of eclipses visible in Yucatan. It opens on page 12B with a total solar eclipse visible in Yucatan, just following the summer solstice when Venus was the evening star in 1452. You see New Year's offerings on 12B, which is appropriate to this time of year. The 260-day almanac follows on 13 through 18B, representing the agricultural season from February to October, when Venus was visible as the evening star at 8-year intervals. And during the period running from 1452 to 1500, solar eclipses were repeatedly seen at Yucatan at the time that Venus was the evening star. And to conclude, the Venus Almanac on 12 through 18 brings together symbols of the 8-year Venus Almanac from central Mexico and the Maya area. The central Mexican year sign and the quincunx Venus symbols representing Lamat in the Maya area are actually both originating from the central Mexican area. The Chac is the counterpart of Tlaloc with a year sign headdress. The Chichan serpent is the counterpart of Quetzalcoatl, the central Mexican feathered serpent representing Venus. And the Madrid shows the same interest in linking the Venus cycle to the solar year that is an essential element of the Venus Almanac. Thank you. Any questions?
El micrófono está abierto para preguntas, pero también si quieren pueden escribir sus preguntas en un papel, nos la entregan y nosotros podemos leerlas.
Leo español, así que no hay problema.
¿Puedes preguntarle en español?
Sí, está bien.
Usted mencionó que Venus, solo por la influencia mexicana, es asociado con la guerra. O sea que los mayas originalmente no lo asociaban con hechos de guerra o de sangre.
Bueno, no sabemos exactamente qué tipo de iconografía tuvo lugar en la época del principio de los mayas, ¿no? Sobre Venus. Pero creo que hay algunos datos que dicen que es algo de guerra hasta en la Mojara, una estela que tiene fechas de 150, algo así. Así que puede ser que la asociación con guerra es muy antiguo, pero el desarrollo de la iconografía de Venus en la época preclásica maya y clásico temprano no está muy bien conocido. Así que únicamente lo que tenemos del área de Teotihuacán, Pero lo que pasa con Teotihuacán también es que ellos tienen énfasis sobre el año solar, que no se ve tanto en la iconografía y las fechas de lo maya. Puede ser, digo, la equivalency entre el año solar de 8 años a 5 ciclos de Venus, eso sí me parece que tuvo lugar primero en Teotihuacán, porque a ellos les interesa más el año solar. Como los mayas tuvo la cuenta larga, ellos estaban mirando los planetas, todos los planetas tal vez, pero asuntos de la luna y tienen cómo fecharlos, y no les interesa tanto lo más sencillo, el periodo más sencillo de 8 años.
Gracias. Susan, respecto al tema Mayapán, según recuerdo, la pintura mural tiene más de 8 paneles.
Eso es una discusión que tengo no están a los dos lados, son 4 y 4. Después, uno de los que trabaja en ese sitio dice que él ve un rastro de otro, pero está al otro lado. Aquí están las dos paredes y después hay uno que tal vez tiene un puntito. Lo he mirado y no lo veo realmente.
Sí, porque la pared de la pirámide a cuyo lado está adosado el edificio tiene otros más que están perdidos. Se ven
pero el pared se termina ahí, como en esta foto que ve a la izquierda se ve la esquina de un pared que termina ahí. No sé, yo he trabajado y nadie me ha dicho que hay más. En la publicación original dijeron que eran 8. Es más tarde ¿cómo se llama el que está trabajando con los murales?
Peraza.
No, Peraza lo conozco muy bien. Uno de los estudiantes que recién terminó su máster's.
Pedro.
No es Pedro, es su hermano.
Miguel
Me dijo, pero mira, hay otro. Y lo miré y no le quise decir que yo no lo veo. Está al lado. Puede ser otra cosa.
Sin embargo, otra cosa que...
No hay lugar por otra escena como este.
En la pared.
En la pared al lado no hay lugar. Es algo así.
Bien, algo que sí tiene que ver con lo que planteas es que los personajes que están adentro parecen ser guerreros, warriors, como dices.
Sí.
Que eso habla, digamos, de una continuidad de la misma idea que presentaste al principio.
Sí, bueno, hay algunos que sí se ve las armas. No sé si todos se ven las armas porque hay algunos que están muy destrozados, pero sí, muchos tienen armas como dioses divinos y para mí es una combinación que habla de la importancia del ciclo solar con el ciclo de Venus.
El miércoles voy a mostrar la observación del tránsito de Venus aquí.
Sí, yo sé pero los tránsitos de Venus son tan raros como hemos visto. Hay 2 separados por 8 años en nuestra historia recién, pero no va a haber uno para 100 años más adelante. no se puede verlo, así que son tan raros que para mí, en un lugar como Mayapán, donde no hubo inscripciones de larga cuenta ni nada, para mí no, y la historia del sitio es, bueno, es 200 años, 200, 300, para mí no es así, pero por eso estamos en las discusiones que tenemos, que es lindo tener distintas ideas para comprobar cuáles tienen razón.
El miércoles podremos seguir platicando.
¿Alguien más tiene una pregunta?
Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. Visita nuestra página web www.vg.edu.gt.